G'day guys, today we are talking about the pronunciation of a country that has come up a little bit in the news recently called Turkey, or as some people are starting to call it,
That have devastated parts of Türkiye.
Turkey.
You'll notice I'm saying Türkiye.
I did notice you were saying Turkey.
Türkiye.
Turkey. The Kia Stinger has a maximum torque of 353 Newton meters. That's pretty good. I don't think, though, that that's helping us figure out how on earth we got from talking about earthquakes in the news onto Kia cars. So we're going to have to break this down and figure out what's actually happened here, maybe do a bit of research along the way. So recently, you may have heard there's been some earthquakes happening over in Turkey, and people in covering the news stories for what's been going on have, I guess, attempted to show empathy, understanding for the country of Turkey by using the pronunciation and spelling of Turkey that the Turkish people use, which has yielded some very interesting pronunciations as people try to take the sounds of Turkish into English, which obviously is going to come up with some mismatches and then some sort of guesses on what might be the right sound to use. So I guess we should probably first start off with, what do you get when you search up how to pronounce Turkey, or this Turkiye, whatever this guy said, right?
How to pronounce Türkiye.
Now that's good, but what one of the comments mentioned was that pronunciation was not spot on. Reason being, I believe, is because this was actually a video by a native English speaker. And pro tip, this is something that I figured out: if you want to learn what the original pronunciation of something is in the original language, what you can do as an example in this situation is take the words how to pronounce Turkey, translate that into Turkish, and then do a Google search or a YouTube search, whatever, of that translated sentence. And that's when you get videos that are probably going to be a bit more accurate and true to the original language, like hopefully this one.
Türkiye.
Yep, so that is a native Turkish speaker there, so that's going to be a lot closer to, or should be correct to, the proper Turkish pronunciation of Turkey. So now we're going to break down what's actually going on in this pronunciation, what the individual sounds are, and we're going to do a bit of a comparison between that versus this Australian radio host attempt at translating that pronunciation into English. And then later on we might look at how you could take this original Turkish pronunciation and take it into English in maybe a more accurate and appropriate way. But first of all, let's get into these two pronunciations here, the English and the Turkish one, and see how they're different and use that to sort of guide us in understanding the Turkish pronunciation. So the first consonant in both pronunciations is the alveolar plosive aspirated, in this case voiceless. And that is luckily in common between both English and Turkish, is having this sound. Both English and Turkish have, you would say, a significant amount of aspiration when they produce the alveolar plosive. However, unfortunately, that is the last time we're ever going to see any agreements between the two pronunciations. It only diverges from here. So the English pronunciation, the Australian English radio host, he went for the first vowel as being an open mid-back rounded vowel, which is a contrast to the Turkish pronunciation, which is a close front rounded vowel. And there's a bit of difference here. It's a little bit curious how different those two vowels are in terms of their frontness and their closeness within this chart. So, like, why on earth did the radio host hear the original pronunciation and go for a vowel down there? So the thing with the closed front rounded vowel, this is the Turkish vowel, is it's very similar to in English how we make the I vowel sound, except the difference is that the mouth is rounded and sort of more closed, as opposed to being sort of more relaxed and open. So if you compare the two, it would be a little something like, and before I do get into this, please be aware that I'm not a phonology expert. I'm just reading shit off the internet, so I'm going to do my best to do this all correctly. So if you were to compare the two, it would be e, e. And so by having the mouth sort of more closed and rounded, the vowel sound ends up becoming a little bit deeper in sound. And I believe that's the reason why the vowel sound is so different between Turkish and English in this situation, is when you make the I vowel sound, it's like there's no rounded English equivalent that far up in that part of the chart, the vowel chart. So it seems that the Australian speaker in this instance went for something that to his ears maybe sounded similar, even though it was a completely different vowel sound. So very curious, but that's obviously incorrect in this case. So now let's look at the second consonant, which is only present in this case in the Turkish pronunciation and is not present in the English one. And that's because at least in Australian English, it's a non-rhotic language. I believe that's how you say that, meaning that we don't make an sound when we say car or marker or something like that, like the Americans do, for example. So we don't end consonants with those alveolar approximants, I believe they are. In this case, it's an alveolar tap, ere, as in Spanish, for example. So that was a trill, by the way, not a tap. So in this situation, in the Turkish pronunciation, that syllable closes with an alveolar tap. So with that alveolar tap on the end of the first syllable in the Turkish pronunciation, that's alveolar tap, we can at least attempt the first syllable now, which should be a little something like tur, something like that. Okay, so let's move on now to the third consonant here in the Turkish pronunciation. So in the English pronunciation, this is a k sound, which is a velar plosive, as in k, ka. However, in the Turkish pronunciation, it's a little bit different. It's not a velar plosive, it's actually a palatal plosive. And that's a little bit different in that it's slightly further, the tongue contact is slightly further forward in the mouth. Now, when you look at a palatal plosive, you might think, I don't really know how to make that sort of sound. I don't know how to make a palatal sound. There are no hard palatal sounds in English. Or are there? See, this is the thing. If you have a look on the IPA chart for English sounds, you see a list here, but you don't see any real palatal sounds, except for the palatal approximant, of course, but we'll get to that later. There are no real palatal sounds in English. However, there are some secret sounds in English that they don't tell you about, which is pretty handy, actually, because it means that you actually have a wider understanding of how to make sounds how to make different sounds than what you might think. So in order to make sense of this, actually we need to first get into our friend Donald Trump.
And you know I'm a huge fan of your mother.
As well as some British memes in order to understand how on earth you actually know how to make palatal sounds when you didn't know it. You didn't realise that you knew. So first of all, let's start off with this meme here. Tuesday, it's Tuesday, isn't it? So this is a British guy, instead of pronouncing Tuesday, as would be the original pronunciation, he's saying Tuesday, innit, bruv? So what's happened here is the original pronunciation, Tuesday, is a combination of the alveolar plosive, yep, t, as well as the palatal approximate, y, t, y, Tuesday, Tuesday. However, making those sort of two sounds one after the other, I guess must be just a little bit awkward in the mouth, to use Tuesday, right? So what's happened with this in this British meme, or what these British people are doing, and maybe I do as well, I'm actually not too sure, is it changes from being an alveolar plosive and a palatal approximate into the alveolar plosive as well as a palatal, believe it's an alveolo-palatal fricative together. And what it means is that you can have a somewhat palatal sound as well as the alveolar plosive all in one go in the form of an affricate, as opposed to making the alveolar plosive and the palatal approximate as sort of two separate sounds. So it's kind of laziness in a way is what causes the British people to end up saying Tuesday, isn't it? So that sort of explains that, which does relate to what we're getting into in a moment about the Turkish pronunciation. It's sort of a way of combining sounds together in order to not make two separate sounds. And so the same happens not in the case of our friend here, Donald Trump. Let's have a listen to how he pronounces the word huge.
He said, I just put in a huge order, and they want to charge a huge surtax.
Huge. Okay, so he says huge. Why does he say huge? So if you were to look at the original pronunciation in terms of what sounds sort of should make up this pronunciation here of huge, it should be a h followed by a y sound. So that's a glottal fricative, h, as well as the palatal approximate, y. But what's happened is that English speakers don't really say that, because making a h followed by a y is a bit awkward. Huge. People don't really say huge. And so what's happened in the case of some New York speakers, in the case of Donald Trump in this instance, is they just drop the glottal fricative. So it just becomes huge. Okay? However, what's happened in the case of most other English speakers is that instead of making the glottal fricative followed by the palatal approximate, they've instead decided to sort of combine the two instead of making the two sounds separately, instead combine them together. And so if you, instead of making a palatal approximate and a glottal fricative, you can then sort of combine them and make a palatal fricative, which is something you may not realize you actually do. But when you pronounce the word huge, huge, you actually make a palatal fricative. Huge. That there is actually a palatal fricative, which you probably didn't know you knew how to make. And that's actually the key for making this Turkish pronunciation sound here, which is the palatal plosive. Is when you make that palatal fricative, when you start the word huge, you can sort of feel which part of the roof of your mouth is considered the palatal position, if you will. It's obviously a very fluid thing. There's no defined spot, but it sort of gives you an idea. Okay, that spot is the palatal position for the tongue to be in. And so you can then take that tongue position in order to, I guess, sort of modify the velar plosive, k, from English, in order to make the palatal plosive aspirated in Turkish. So let's see if we can have a go at that. Ka, a ka, that's our velar plosive. Ka, a ka. Kind of sounds like it's got a y sound in it. Ka, a ka. Ka, a ka. Kya, a kya. Kya, ka, kya. Right? Great, so now that we've got that, we can have a go soon at pronouncing that syllable by itself, or the first two syllables. But first we'll get into this next vowel sound, the second vowel sound in the Turkish pronunciation, and we'll get through to the end of the Turkish pronunciation here without talking about the English one for a second. Then we'll, at the end, figure out what went wrong in the English pronunciation and why there's actually only two syllables in the English pronunciation versus the Turkish one. So in the Turkish pronunciation, the second vowel here is the closed front unrounded vowel, I, followed by, and we were just mentioning this one before, followed by the palatal approximate. Because you see, Turkish doesn't actually have any diphthongs, they're all monophthongs. So in order to go from an I to the final vowel sound, which is a mid-front unrounded vowel, they can't just go from one to the other because that's effectively a diphthong. So that's why they've put in this instance, the palatal approximate to go from I to a Y to an E. So it becomes I, right? So let's try and put this all together now, just for the Turkish pronunciation. Let's have our lady speak for a second here.
Türkiye. Türkiye.
Türkiye. Türkiye. It can be really difficult when you're trying to pronounce foreign sounds. Sometimes, at least for me, I have a habit of taking away aspiration from consonants, especially a k and a t sound, taking away aspiration when trying to sound foreign. But we need to keep in mind that Turkish keeps aspiration in the consonants in a similar way to English. So you need to keep that aspiration in the t and the k, even though it's not a k, it's a k, right? It's a palatal plosive. Türkiye. Keeping that aspiration in there. So great, that's got us covered for the Turkish pronunciation. I think we've got that under control. What went wrong in this English pronunciation? So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that Türkiye, whatever the fuck happened here, Türkiye, the stressed syllable is different. What's happened here? We've also lost the palatal approximate. What's happened here? And I think I've got a theory. My theory is when you're an English speaker, right, especially an Australian English speaker, and you hear a sound, in this instance, in the Turkish pronunciation, you've got the closed front unrounded vowel followed by the palatal approximate, ear. It kind of sounds like a long closed front unrounded vowel, e, which is only ever used, a long closed front unrounded vowel is only ever used in Australian English in stressed syllables. Okay, you might hear that vowel used in short version in unstressed syllables, but you only hear the long version in stressed syllables. And so perhaps what happened is the radio host heard what he thought sounded very much like this sort of long closed front unrounded vowel, and he just assumed that, oh, it's only going to be long if that's where the stressed syllable is. So that's how he turned Türkiye into Türkiye, right? That's my theory anyway. So that's why I think the syllable is in the wrong position with the English pronunciation. As for why the vowels are in a different spot, I think that's maybe a little bit more clear, a little bit less theoretical, at least in my opinion. I believe this one's a pretty clear one in that, so in the Turkish pronunciation, we're ending in an e sound. And the thing is, English speakers don't like to end in that sound. That's the closed mid front unrounded vowel. And you hear that, for example, in Spanish words. So if you take the Spanish word grande, which means big, if an English speaker then tries to say that, they'll say grande or something like that, right? Rather than finishing with an e sound, grande, they'll say grande, right? Becomes a diphthong, a. So English speakers don't like to end in an e sound. And in this case, we've got a word, a pronunciation that ends in an e sound. The English speaker doesn't like that, so we're going to have to find an alternative. What's the alternative? Well, we can't really go make an a sound because we're already sort of starting off those last vowels there in a closed and fronted position. So to go e is just kind of awkward. It doesn't really make sense, and I think that's why the English speaker chose not to do that. And so as a result, the English speaker decided to start off in that more closed and fronted position of e and come down to a different location. Instead of coming to e, he came down to Türkiye, ear. Instead of ear, right? So I think that's how we've arrived at that. And the other thing to keep in mind is the reason we've lost the palatal approximate, y, is because English speakers, when going from e to kind of skip, for most speakers, skip any sort of palatal approximate and just go straight from e to and becomes ear, as opposed to ear, Feels kind of awkward to say ear. And you say it quickly, you just end up going ear, right? So that's how we've gone to Türkiye. So the question is, what English pronunciation, using English sounds, would best fit this Turkish word? I think the most appropriate pronunciation to use would be very similar to the original, Turkey, but it instead becomes Türkiye, right? Sort of rhymes with sturdier, Türkiye. Now, that's definitely not perfect, and there's definitely other opinions that you could have on what might be a more appropriate transferring of this pronunciation into English. But I know that, in my opinion at least, I think it would make more sense to say Türkiye. But I mean, we'll see what society does, because it's one of those things that one person doesn't decide. Society as a whole will eventually converge, you would hope, on one pronunciation, or maybe two. Who knows, maybe more. But at least for the moment, it's a bit sort of up in the air as to what people are going to go for. But at least, in my opinion, I'm just going to say Turkey or Türkiye. And just as a side note, obviously when we're trying to spell Türkiye, we've got this little dots above the U in the spelling, in the Turkish spelling, and it seems that people are starting to use that in terms of how they're spelling it in English news stories, for example. I'm not sure that I'm fully on board with that. It's kind of like the word cafe, right? You see cafe written in a restaurant. It's got the little accent over the E to sort of honour the original characters in French. However, if you're sending an email to someone, you're sending a message to someone, whatever it is, most of the time when you write the word cafe, you're not going to find the right character to put the little accent above it. And so I think, sort of in my opinion, that's the way that we should go with Türkiye, is that we take away those little two dots and sort of use that there as the way to spell it moving forward, because otherwise it just becomes a little bit unmanageable. Anyway, just my thoughts and opinions. Happy for you guys to leave other thoughts and opinions, give your interpretation of what the hell is going on, what might be a better pronunciation of this to use in English, whether I got the Turkish pronunciation wrong at any point. Please leave a comment, let me know your thoughts, because I'm just delving into this for the first time and definitely not an expert. As I mentioned in the beginning, I could be getting shit wrong. So anyway, thanks. As I mentioned, guys, leave a comment and I'll talk to you guys next time.
No Turkey.